Good governance doesn't just protect you from the things that could potentially go wrong. It actually makes your marketing better, measurably so, and consistently, and in ways that genuinely surprise us. And that's what the main focus of this episode is. So hello and welcome to the Healthtech Marketing Show. I'm your host, Adam Turinas. I'm the CEO of Health Launchpad. That's one of the presenting sponsors. Health Launchpad is the pipeline growth company for B2B healthcare. And a big thank you to you, as always, for listening to this show. I hope you enjoy it. And if you haven't subscribed, please click the plus button, click the follow button, whatever app you're using. And you can even subscribe on YouTube and get excerpts from this. I also want to give a big thank you to the wonderful people at Healthcare Now Radio, the 24/7 healthcare only radio network, online radio network. And they also have a podcast syndication network that this show is on. We really love being part of it. So big thank you to Roberta and Carol for all that you do. So this is the 5th episode in our series on how to use AI to grow your pipeline. And we've covered a lot of ground today. So we started with an overall strategic view at the gap in using AI to grow pipeline. And that's a frustrating gap that most companies are dealing with right now, which is the disconnect between using AI tactically and actually using it to grow revenue. And then in the second episode, we went deep on signal intelligence, and then we focused on orchestration. And in the last episode, where I had the brilliant Chris Marin from Inovalon on the show, the topic was execution and acceleration. If you haven't listened to any of those episodes, I encourage you to go back. And in fact, there are links in the show notes to help you sort of listen to the episodes that go before this. This episode on its own, I think, is designed so that you can listen to it without listening to the other ones. But the complete series provides, the idea here is to give you a strategic approach to using AI to grow your pipeline, because this is not a one episode deal. So the 4-pillar framework that we're using with this series is signal intelligence, orchestration, execution acceleration, and what today's episode about, which is governance and learning. And I want to address something head on before we get into it. Governance tends to get treated as a sort of required pillar. It's like the sort of thing that's the basic hygiene thing that you need to do. And, this is sort of the compliance chapter, if you like, the risk management issue. I used to think that too, and I don't anymore. And by the end of this episode, I hope that you will have a different view about the importance of governance and actually how it can help you improve quality and deliver outputs that can help you grow the top line. Let me bring back the scenario we've been using across this series. You're selling into a mid-sized health system. Maybe it's something with, a system with 5 to 8 hospitals. You've got long sales cycles, lots of stakeholders, and a strong incumbent who's already in the account. And thanks to everything we've talked about, your intent platform, your signal aggregation, your orchestration layer, and thanks to all that, you've identified that this account is quietly accelerating its search for a new solution. Multiple people from across the organization are engaging with you. The pattern matches accounts that have historically become pipeline. You might remember from the last episode with Chris Marin, where they talked about AOS, which is an AI-enabled orchestration system. So your AI-powered system starts to act. It routes the account to the right team. It starts coordinating outreach. The CFO gets ROI content. The IT director gets integration validation. And then clinical leads get workflow impact messaging. Now, here's the question I want you to ask yourself. How confident are you in what your AI is actually saying to those people? Is the content factually accurate about your product? Is it consistent with your approved messaging? Is there anything in there that if a compliance officer read it would make them uncomfortable and get you in trouble? And is your AI learning the right lessons from how this plays out? Or is it quietly, potentially reinforcing the wrong behaviors. In most industries, if the answer to some of those questions is, I'm not totally sure, the consequences are manageable. In healthcare, they're not. The sales cycles are long, the relationships are fragile, brand trust is everything. And the regulatory environment means that a single piece of content making the wrong claim about clinical outcomes, about ROI, about compliance can do real damage, not just to your deal, but to your organization's reputation. And that's before we even take into account things like data privacy. The moment you're feeding account data, contact data, and behavioral data into AI systems, you're potentially in HIPAA territory, but you're definitely in an area that can get you into trouble. And you need to know exactly what you're doing. So yes, governance in healthcare is load-bearing. But it's also, as I said at the top, something that can give you a genuine competitive advantage if you approach it strategically rather than defensively. And I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. I want to give you a framework for thinking about governance and learning. 4 questions that every marketing leader running an AI-powered pipeline system should be able to answer all 4 of these clearly. And the first 3 are the ones that most people focus on. They're the protective questions. The 4th one is the one almost nobody talks about, and it's arguably the most important. So let me go through the questions. Number 1, what does your AI know? Number 2, what can your AI do? Number 3, what is your AI learning? And fourthly, the one that changes how you think about all the others. What unexpected advantages does your governance give you? Let me take them in order. So number 1, what does your AI know? This is your knowledge and data governance layer. The quality of what your AI outputs is directly determined by the quality of what you put in. That may sound obvious, but most teams don't act like it's obvious. Think about what your AI system needs to know to function well in a complex healthcare sales environment. It needs to know your products accurately, specifically, not just at sort of brochure level or what's on your website. It needs to know your approved messaging, your brand voice, your positioning. It needs to understand your personas, but not just job titles, but how those people actually think, what they worry about, what makes them trust the vendor or walk away. The more nuance you can include, the better. And critically, it needs to know what it's not allowed to say. In healthcare, where compliance, whether it's HIPAA, whether it's FDA, whether it's CMS level requirements, clinical claims, data sensitivity, they're all in play. The guardrails on your knowledge layer are just as important as the knowledge itself. On data privacy specifically, be clear about what data you're putting into these systems. Account data, contact records, behavioral data, anything that could be considered sensitive information needs to be handled with real clear in an intentional way, and where you know you're not going to do any harm. You need to know where your data is going, how it's being stored, whether your AI vendors are compliant. And that's not a conversation to have after something goes wrong. That's something to have now. And I want to share something from our own experience here because I think this illustrates better than any framework can. At Health Launchpad, we've spent the last 6 months building a specialized knowledge system. We called it the HLP Brain. It's a carefully curated foundation that reflects how healthcare technology buyers actually think and make decisions. And we've made a deliberate choice about what we put in. In fact, we found early on that by overloading it and doing it in an unstructured way, the output that you got was actually generally worse than if you used the generative AI engines. We've got carefully curated information there with a deliberate taxonomy of how the AI crunches on that information. We didn't actually focus on marketing best practices when we've loaded that information in. And in fact, early on, when we put that information on, we found that it cluttered up the way the system worked. And again, the outputs were not very good. And so, for example, we didn't load it with content guidelines. What we focused on is buyer expertise. So how healthcare technology buyers evaluate vendors, what they care about, what language they use, what makes them trust a recommendation. We also included things like real buyer interviews, actual voices from decision makers who've been in market. And here's what happened when we use this to create content. Just as an aside, we use AI to help in the pre and the post phase of content creation. So we use it for synthesizing lots of complex information and for creating outlines and early drafts. Our writers then do the writing and the editing. We then use AI after a human has created a presentable draft to suggest ways to optimize it for the AI engines and for SEO. But here's the thing when we use the brain, the content got more credible than what we create with ChatGPT or Claude. It was more knowledgeable, more genuinely useful to a sophisticated healthcare buyer, which is exactly what we're aiming for. But here's the part that surprised us. Not only was the content more expert, but from a marketing best practices standpoint, the quality improved too. The writing was sharper. The messaging was more persuasive. The relevance was better. And we weren't trying to optimize for any of that. We were trying to make our AI smarter about buyers, and better marketing followed as a direct result. I'll come back to why that matters in a moment, but hold that thought. Question 2, what can your AI do? This is your operational governance layer. And the core principle here is one that Chris Marin articulated really well in our last episode. He talked about 3 strands: humans, AI, and deterministic code automation. And the job of whoever is designing these systems is to be explicit about which task belongs to which strand. Not everything should go in the AI bucket. Some things belong to humans, judgment calls, sensitive relationship moments, anything where getting it wrong has really serious consequences. Some things belong in the deterministic bucket, the math, the routing rules, the compliance check that need to produce the same result every single time. And then there's the AI bucket, genuinely powerful, but capable of failing in ways that are hard to predict. Hallucination is real. AI systems can generate content that sounds authoritative, but is factually wrong. And sometimes it's actually quite hard to spot that. In healthcare, where your buyers are very sophisticated clinicians, finance leaders, and highly experienced procurement professionals, that's not just embarrassing. It's a credibility problem that can be almost impossible to recover from. So what can your AI do? It means being explicit about where the human stays in the loop. Back to our health system scenario. When your AI is coordinating outreach to the CFO and the clinical team and procurement, who is reviewing that content before it goes out? What are the guardrails baked into your prompts and workflows that prevent it from going off script? Chris's phrase from the last episode has stuck with me. Reduce time to first draft, not automate to final send. Your AI produces the first draft. A human still owns the output. And at this stage of the game in this industry, that's the right posture. Question 3, what is your AI learning? This is the question that separates teams using AI tactically from teams building genuine long-term advantage. Because if your AI system isn't getting smarter over time, you're just running in place. Learning happens at 2 levels. The first is the system level. Are you closing the loop between your AI's recommendations and your actual pipeline outcomes? So again, back to the scenario. So when your AI flags an account as quietly accelerating and your team acts on it, what happens? Does it convert? Does it stall? Does the deal eventually close? And is that outcome being fed back into the system so it can recalibrate? This is the learning loop Chris described with the agentic opportunity scoring system at Inovalon. As leads progress through their system and outcomes are recorded against the predictions, the model gets smarter. The probabilities get better. The signal interpretation improves. That's a compounding advantage, and it doesn't happen by accident. The second level is the human level. Are you building in regular moments to review what's working, to ask which signals are we consistently overriding and why? What are we learning from deals we lost that we thought we'd win? And I'll share something from our own experience again. We recently went back to about 20 marketing leaders who had seen an early version of our knowledge system. They were really generous with their feedback and they were impressed with what we built, but they were also very clear about what it would make it more valuable to them. And what we heard completely reshaped how we were approaching the next version. The learning didn't come from the AI. It came from the conversations, from asking the right people the right questions and being willing to rebuild based on what we heard. That's what a genuine learning culture looks like. Not just feedback loops in your tech stack, but the intellectual humility in your team to know when to correct. Question 4. What unexpected advantages does your governance give you? This is the question nobody asks. Because when you think of governance as compliance, as the thing that lawyers and IT departments tell you to do, you're only ever thinking about what it actually prevents. You're not thinking about what it enables. But here's what we found. When you invest seriously in governance, when you're deliberate about what your AI knows, disciplined about what it does, and committed to what it learns, something else happens. Your whole system gets better, not just safer, better. Let me give you the most concrete example I have. As I mentioned earlier on, when we built our first generation of our knowledge system, we included carefully curated expert information about healthcare and healthcare technology that was extremely relevant to how the buyers think and make decisions. But we also included a lot of content that was related to marketing best practices, and we put a lot of it into the system. And what we found is that the more of this information that we put in, the worse the output was. So we went back and the second iteration of the system, we stripped all that out and we just focused on the expert related content. And we were very deliberate and intentional in what we put in. We actually took a less is more approach, and we were extremely intentional about the information that we had in the system and what we didn't have in the system, and the taxonomy by which the AI engines crunched through the data. As a result of it, we got much better outputs. So without a single instruction about how to write better, and for example, how to structure an email better, the content was just more credible, more relevant, and more convincing because it was built on a foundation of genuine expertise about the people it was trying to reach. This told us something important. The instinct that most teams have is to govern for style, but it's actually the wrong instinct. Govern for substance, and the style will take care of itself. And there's a broader principle here that I think applies beyond just knowledge governance. Teams that take governance seriously tend to be more consistent. Their messaging is tighter, their outreach is better calibrated, their AI systems don't drift into producing content that nobody recognizes as theirs. And in a market where AI-generated slop is increasingly everywhere, where buyers are getting better at recognizing generic low-effort outreach, consistency and credibility are becoming genuine differentiators. So the unexpected advantage of good governance isn't just that you avoid the bad outcomes. It's that you end up with a system that produces better outcomes than you would have got without it. Governance done right is a quality multiplier. And that's not what the lawyers are telling you about why you need to do it, but it means it is incredibly important for the success of your investments in AI. Let's bring this back to the health system deal one last time. You've got an account that's accelerating. Multiple stakeholders are engaging. Your AI is coordinating a sophisticated multi-persona outreach sequence across the CFO, the clinical team, and procurement. A team with good governance answers all 4 questions clearly. They know exactly what their AI knows, and they're invested in making that knowledge genuinely expert. They know exactly what their AI can do and where the human stays in the loop. They know what their AI is learning because they built feedback loops that connect recommendations to outcomes. And they know what advantages their governance gives them because they've stopped thinking about it as a constraint and started thinking about it as a foundation. A team without governance, they're moving, possibly faster in the short term, but they're one bad email, one inaccurate claim, one piece of AI-generated content that didn't get review away from a problem that unravels months of relationship building. In healthcare, trust is the currency. Governance is how you protect it. And it turns out how you can actually compound it too. So as I bring this to a close, I've got 4 takeaways, one for each question. First, invest seriously in what your AI knows. Build a knowledge foundation that reflects how your buyers actually think, not just what your brand wants to say. Govern for substance and quality will follow. Second, be explicit about what your AI can do and where humans stay in the loop. Design for first draft, not final send, especially in healthcare. Third, build for learning. Close the loop between your AI's recommendations and your actual outcomes, and create the space on your team to reflect on what's working and rebuild accordingly. And fourth, and this is the one I really want you to sit with, stop thinking about governance as the boring bit. The teams that will pull ahead in the next 2 to 3 years won't just be the ones with the best AI tools. They'll be the ones with the best foundations, the ones who took the time to build something that gets smarter, stays consistent, and produces work that buyers actually trust. That's the unexpected upside of good guardrails, better marketing. So that brings us to the end of the governance and learning episode. In the last episode of the AI series, we start putting the pieces together. How do you build a roadmap for all of this? How do you prioritize where to start? And how do you make the case for investing in it properly? That's coming up in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, if you're finding this series useful, please hit follow in your podcast app so you don't miss an episode. And if this one resonated, I'd really appreciate it if you shared it with a colleague or peer. It makes a real difference to us. And if you want to have a conversation about any of this, we're still figuring all of this out. And I don't pretend we've got it all completely cracked, but we've learned a lot by doing it. And I'm always happy to talk through where you might be on this journey. And so there's a link down below to book a call with us in the show notes. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you on the next one.